Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Fishing for Men podcast. It's a part of the Fishing for Men Ministries. Fishing for Men exists to help equip men, build community, and live lives transformed by Christ. And so we're so grateful that you've decided to spend some time with us here today. I'm your host, Billy, and with me in the room, I've got...
Brandon. That's it.
And that's it. It's just Billy and Brandon. Cody is in here. I will mention his name, but he's just doing audio for us tonight. And so it's
Smaller
Billy,
crew.
Brandon, and the Bible. Triple B's.
Oh, look at that.
This might be a spinoff show.
You heard it here first.
Yeah. So, Brandon, tell everybody, what is your favorite part of the Bible?
So Billy's notes say, I'm not allowed to say everything, but I don't care. I want to say everything.
No, you won't.
I know what you were thinking I was going to say.
I do think I know what you're going to say. Actually, if I had to guess, there's two, Genesis and Matthew.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. But a little bit of balance, a
But
little
why?
bit of Old Testament. New
Why have
Testament.
those become two of your favorite?
Just because. You're like, this is going to be a tough
This is going to be a really fun episode, y'all.
Those have been the two books of the Bible that I have naturally, over time, as I've kind of dove in, gotten into the weeds on stuff that I just personally like. Not that I don't like other parts, but if you're going to push me to choose favorites, those will be it.
You're allowed to have favorites.
No, I don't think so.
I was
Kid?
once told that I was allowed to.
You were? By who?
A guy named Jared.
Who's Jared?
He works he's working on like a church planting network here in Dallas, and then he works for something called Bucks.
So this
Brothers
is an
in
actual
Christ.
conversation. I thought you were going to give me a smart aleck
No.
response. Oh,
No, he actually he was like, "You're allowed to have favorites," and I'm like, "I already did, but thanks for the permission."
So Genesis, that's kind of like the beginning and the end, I think, of God's story, in that what he created us for and what this story is working out to. And so I think it gives us like the blueprint for the entire Bible. It's theologically just like really rich. You can tie pretty much anything back to it, and it's a really cool and weird story all at the same time. Lots of different scenes. So it's always fun to read through and learn more from. Matthew, a really second close in the New Testament would be, you can probably guess this too. No,
In the New
for me,
in the New Testament,
I talk about it a lot.
John.
Yep. So,
He
but
loves John 1 in particular.
and now I'm like in the three Johns, first, second, and third John.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, those are pretty good too.
Those are good too.
But
To
since
smack you in the face if you don't watch out.
but just let's stick with Matthew. I think it encapsulates really well just what Jesus's ministry was, and I just love the Sermon on the Mount. So
I thought you were just copping out and just picking the first books in the Old Testament.
that would be easy, right? I'm just like, I'll pick the first of each. How about yourself?
In particular, I have become a big fan of Exodus and Leviticus, which Brandon always gives me crap for that.
It's now like a test I give to anyone that's a potential friend. I'm like, rank the first 5 books of the Bible, please. I get a weird look, but it tells a lot about a person.
But I would say, just in general, I really appreciate the first 5. So the Torah.
That would be Genesis.
Just Exodus, which we'll get here in a second. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, which most people would say there are 2 in there that are incredibly boring, Leviticus and Numbers. But I got the chance to do basically 6-month studies on both Exodus and Leviticus last year. And man, they were just really, really awesome and rich, and gave me a different lens through which I looked at, honestly, both of those books. But the reason I did Exodus first was because very much in the same way that, like, for Christians, the story that you always tie back to is the crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. For people who are Jewish, Exodus is that story. It's the redemption out of Egypt. And so I was like, so if that is the important story for them, like, really curious what that means for me as somebody who follows Jesus. And so it was a cool story to kind of go through. But big fan of the Old Testament. If I had to pick something in the New Testament,
Are you telling me you don't enjoy the New Testament?
I do enjoy it. But if I had to spend the rest of my life, this is how I usually phrase it, people. If I had to spend the rest of my life studying a part of the Bible, I would probably spend it in the Old Testament.
Interesting. I don't concur, but interesting.
I love how, which we'll talk about in a bit, but I love how steeped the Old Testament is in the New Testament, and obviously all of the writers in the New Testament knew the Old Testament really well.
That was the Bible they had.
I know they didn't have the New Testament, and so I'm like, interesting. How does that now influence that I do have the New Testament and what they wrote and all that kind of stuff? So, really been a big fan of the Old Testament. If I did have to pick a favorite, becoming a really big fan of Paul.
Okay.
Yep, I know it's a very broad swath because
I was like, that's like most of it, but yeah. Any particular?
I've been reading. I just finished reading through Romans, and so that one's been really cool. But I just appreciate how Paul writes. Like, he's pretty unapologetic about just, hey, here's where you're doing really well. Here's where I'm going to smack you in the face. But he does it in a really cool way, even though it is challenging because the dude doesn't know where punctuation goes. Little do they know. They didn't have punctuation back then. But he likes really long sentences.
Yes, he does.
Brandon, what are some of the typical opinions that you hear when people talk about the Old Testament?
So I think we have to set you and me aside because we have an atypical view of the Old Testament.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Like, if you went and had coffee with,
just people I talk to around church or whatever.
I know you get coffee and lunches with people from just different spectrums of where they are on their faith journey. Like, what have you heard when you do talk to people about what they say about the Old Testament?
A majority of people don't read it. And if they do, it's typically like Genesis through like Mount Sinai in Exodus. So like before you get into all the
right when they
temple
get to the mountain,
stuff
and
like the Ten Commandments basically, right? And then it's kind of like done.
I'm reading through that with Will right now. I'm just reading a chapter every night with him, and we're reading through the make sure your curtains are 42 feet wide or long.
Cubits, sir, cubits. Please give it to me.
He has
cubits.
a kid Bible. It's in feet.
Oh, okay. Weak.
But it's an, what is it? NLRT is what it's called. It's New Living Revised Translation. It's for kids so they can like understand
it. Yeah.
So there's no cubits and all that fun stuff in there. But it's really great to get them to go to sleep, especially right now.
A nice storm brewing outside.
Listening to
the dimensions of the temple. You're a fun dad. So people avoid it largely, I think. And then other things I hear that are common are, well, I don't need the Old Testament because I have the New Testament. Or, I just don't like the Old Testament because God was so angry in that. And I don't think that's who he is. Comments like that. This doesn't relate to my old life. That was all about laws, and I don't have to live under the law anymore. So what's the point in reading it?
For sure. Yeah, I get definitely concur with all those, but even like, I don't like how they write, or
I can't relate to it.
We as Western society people lean more towards the Greek and how they typically write.
That's the beginnings of our society today.
Exactly. And so people lean more towards like, it's easier to read in the New Testament. Totally get that. And I think the God one is usually the biggest one. They're like, God's just so wrathful and mean and all these things. And I'm like, okay, like totally get that, because there's a lot of there that is very different than what we potentially perceive on the surface level. But I really want to spend some time today talking about why we should read the Old Testament, why it's important, and the significance to us for something that was written over 2 millennia ago. Because that's the other thing is like, that's so far ago. Like, why would that apply to me?
A long time ago, yeah.
Why would that even apply to me now? So first, structure of Old Testament. We've already kind of touched on the first 5 books, sometimes referred to the law, sometimes referred to as Torah.
Don't forget Pentateuch.
Or the Pentateuch. The other one, that's the Greek.
That's the Greek version of it.
Translation for the first 5. 99% of this, we'll say 99% is written by Moses, and somebody's going to go, well, what about the 1%?
I would say that the 99 is even contested.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Depends on
especially like Moses didn't write. Moses died at whatever age.
More than likely not.
Yeah. But a lot of that is because people came back in and stitched books together, intros, outros.
They editorialized it a bit. Yeah.
Very much so. And if you go back and look at a lot of the older copies, you can see all these notes, in the margins and all that kind of stuff, which is really, really kind of cool. But like Brandon talked about, this has the creation account in it, super critical. I'd say one of the most critical pieces to understand here is the first 12 books of Genesis. Or chapters of Genesis, as you just understand the cycle that's about to happen with humanity. Then we got the birth and the creation of Israel, which ends up being God's chosen people. It's going to talk about captivity for quite a long time, and then the Exodus out of that, wandering in the wilderness, and then the law that is given, and then we'll even get back into Deuteronomy, which is a book about remembering the law that was given to the next generation of those people who weren't there when the Exodus happened.
That was at the end of the wandering, right?
Yeah. Yep. And then we've got history, which is going to be the conquest of the land. This is going to be starting in Joshua, and then into Judges and Ruth, where they are getting into this land that God has promised them, and they're starting to conquer people. But they're also starting to go through some ups and downs. As
Just a few.
Maybe a few spirals. Just this huge roller coaster that is going on. And then you're going to get into this tale of 2 kingdoms. One that is united, one is that is divided. That's going to be in things like 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Some of those are going to be really frustrating because if you read them in back to back, they're like going to say a lot of the same stuff.
Like, wait, I just read this.
Yeah, but they have a different lens through which they're looking through some of those things. Then we've got the exile period, which is going to be Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Esther's another really good one that I actually like in the Old Testament too. And then wisdom books. This is going to be speaking to the northern Israel and to the southern kingdom in Judah. And this is going to have poetry from Job and
Hold
Psalms.
on a second. Can you mentioned it a couple times now. Want to touch on like this divided, united?
Yeah.
Really quick.
Yep. So eventually, as the story goes on, Israel ends up splitting into 2.
Yeah, when did that happen? Not like year-wise, but story-wise.
Oh.
I think an easy thing that people can all recognize is King David.
Oh, yeah.
So it didn't happen at King David, but shortly it was so King David's son, King Solomon, who built the temple, and then shortly after that, with his lineage, that's when it splits.
Yeah, absolutely. And Judah was only 2 of the tribes, I believe, right?
Yeah, so there were 12 tribes total. You had 10 in the north and then the 2 in the south.
Yeah. And then we've got, so poetry, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, everybody's favorite book, and Song of Solomon. Then we've got major prophets. We're going to think things like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, and then the minor prophets, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, which is where the Hebrew Bible, our version of the Hebrew Bible ends. Because if you actually go look at the Hebrew Bible, it's going to be in a different order.
I think it ends with Second Chronicles. No?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. If you ever get your hands on the Hebrew one, go check it out. It's in a bit of a different order there.
It starts off the same.
It does. It does start off the same. Which
first 5 books are still the first 5 books.
Yes, they are.
So
one of the... Yeah, go ahead.
I want to interrupt. Sorry.
No, go. Ask away.
We talked about our favorites. Which areas do you struggle the most in reading through?
Oh, gosh.
So I'm gonna set aside Leviticus and Numbers just because we already kind of went over that. But outside of the first 5 books,
no, yeah, I was gonna go that direction. I would say many times I've never been a poetry fan.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so I can find myself tuning out in the poetry section unless there's like. The cool thing though is reading through that sometimes is helpful for me. Like if there is.
When life's happening,
like emotions that I'm like trying to put my hands on. Like David does a really good job of just airing it out.
Yeah.
And so if you want to go find like, man, I'm feeling this, and what is the prayer or what is it that David said in Psalms? Man, go look at that one. But I'm not my mind just doesn't just click to the poetry stuff. And then I would say, man, the prophets are so strange.
Yeah. So I'm not into poetry in like the modern day poetry sense, but I really like Psalms.
I could see that.
Really, really like Psalms.
We have just a Psalms book that we got that actually is sitting in our living room.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I think we had Proverbs too, but the kids took that and drew all in it.
But I'm the same. And so the minor prophets are short enough that I can work my way through them. But you get into Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, probably those 3. Mm-hmm. They're rich in content, and I'll hear people talk about them, and I'm like, wow, that sounds really interesting. But when I go to read it, I'm like, I do not see any of that stuff they're talking about, and they're long. Mm-hmm. And so it's like this long slog for me.
I mean, God asked Ezekiel to do some strange things.
Yes, he did.
Just go read the first few chapters. You're like, what? Huh? Why?
Yeah.
So here's the question. Why? Why does this part of the Bible, why does it even matter to us as Christians? And should we even read it?
Is that a question for me?
If somebody asked it, let's do this. If somebody in that coffee asked you, hey, Brandon, why should we have the New Testament, or any of the objections that, they may have already told you about why they don't like the Old Testament. Why would you tell them they should read the Old Testament? Or that it's at least beneficial for them to...
I feel like I'm unprepared for this pop quiz. I think there's so many different ways to approach this, but I think one of the things is I think the entire Bible is one story, one cohesive story from beginning to end, and it's God's story about how he created the world, sin entered, and he has been on a rescue mission to redeem his creation, us being kind of like a highlight of that, back to him, to its original intent. And kind of the climax of that story is Jesus coming on the scene and the works that he did, his birth, his ministry here on earth, his death, his resurrection, and ascension back to heaven. And although you can read just the New Testament on its own, you miss out on so much of the story leading up to that. And I think you also miss out so much of the story of humanity and those highs and lows that you were talking about earlier if you skip over all that, because you know what? We still do the exact same things, just in a different setting.
So, we have that in our, whenever we're talking through some stuff, we have that phrase of, man, we haven't changed much, have we?
No, yeah, that comes up a lot. And I heard today someone was talking about how God could have, you look at like free will or, and I'm not talking about in the sense of salvation, but like just God giving us the ability to choose him or reject him. And how, so another thing to add another dimension to this is like we experience time linearly and only at one moment at a time. We can remember back into the past, but like God doesn't exist in time like we do. Like
which just hurts your brain to think
yeah,
about.
in all of it all at the same time, right? So he hasn't changed, even if we look back and see him differently, portrayed differently in the Old Testament. And so God in that plan saw that it was good to allow us to have the choice to reject him and sin enter the world so that we could experience and know the greatness and the goodness of the redeeming character of Christ. And that was something new I heard today that like really made me stop and think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like God thought it was better that we experienced all the troubles we experience in the world because knowing that piece of Christ was better than having a perfect world and not knowing it. And I think the Old Testament like builds that up.
As you're talking, this question pops in my mind of, so what about like the Old Testament people? Are they saved too?
Are we're diving into like deep theological stuff? I thought we were just talking about the Old Testament.
That's just a question that pops up. This is actually a question that I've always wrestled with quite honestly.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard different things about like when the dead are resurrected, what does that mean? Who does that include? Who doesn't include? I don't know.
Yeah. One interesting piece is if you go read Revelation 21,
Excuse me, sir, this is
it's an Old Testament, but they have an Old Testament reference that talks about the 12 tribes as how they are on the walls of the kingdom. And you're like, well, okay, interesting. And so the first thing you mentioned was this is one story. And as you read Revelation 21 in a very succinct way, it ties those two together in a really awesome way that when I've ever read that before, it was like, okay, well, why are they here?
aren't they gone?
And then I was like, okay, well, what does that then mean? Like, they're obviously part of the kingdom walls, which would mean there's an inclusion within God's kingdom. Well, how does that happen? Because the whole New Testament talks about you're saved by faith through grace in Jesus Christ. I'm like, well, what about the Old Testament people? And so one of the things they pointed out was, as I was just reading through, and this was like last week, was
you guys are getting fresh content.
Yeah. Is this revelation that they had versus what we have is just different. They had these promises that of a Messiah that was coming, that he would be born of a man, of a virgin, that he would come and suffer and be beaten. And as you read through the Old Testament, you get to see these promises play out of the suffering servant and being beaten on the cross and all these promises that Jesus fulfills, but their faith was built off the promises and ours are built off the actual event that happened. And so they had a Messiah in mind of a future one that was coming. They just didn't know his name was Jesus. And so they placed their faith in that, and that is the driving factor of their faith.
Yeah, you're starting to like play around the edges of what is heaven, what is hell, our concept of that versus how they perceived it, and all sorts of
fun topics.
We won't dive into.
We won't go into those. But one thing that I think is critical, and I heard it described this way, is one of the cool turning points throughout the whole Old Testament. So things that matter to us as Christians is we hear this topic in the New Testament of, hey, you're under the new covenant. Like, well, okay, what is that?
Well, means we don't have to follow the law anymore, right?
Yeah, dude, we don't have no law. We got no rules. No rules. No.
Leviticus level. I don't believe that.
No. What is interesting about that is we are not under the burden of the law. But that doesn't mean the law was ever bad. It was meant to reveal some of the unworthiness that we had within us.
Well, and we can go to my favorite New Testament book
We can.
for an example of that.
And so what's cool is then, so if there's a new covenant, there were other ones
Yeah.
that happened. And so there's these turning points that happen throughout. Three of them are really close together. I didn't actually put the Noahic one in my notes. I don't know why I didn't do that. But there's the Noahic covenant, there's the Abrahamic covenant, there's the Mosaic covenant, and then there's the Davidic covenant.
When you turn those into adjectives, they sound really fancy.
I know they do, but it's just Noah, Abraham, Moses, and David.
Look at that.
And so as you read through those, take a look at them. Like, what is God promising to the people in each of those? And then what does that mean for the one that we now have in the New Testament?
I think the Noah one's really important because he promised he would never destroy everything again.
Well, he promised he would never destroy it by a flood.
Okay.
I think that's an interesting distinction.
So fire is possible. Earthquakes,
I don't know. Maybe.
disease.
The words that are in Scripture, I think all of them are intentional
Why do you think that?
because it's the inspired Word of God.
Okay.
He doesn't just throw randos out there.
No.
And so as you read through, if you decide to do this, which I think you should, pay attention to these. Pay attention to these covenants that God is making to very specific people that he's chosen to do these things. The other piece, we kind of talked about this earlier, but the Old Testament informs the New Testament. All of the New Testament writers were steeped and more or less probably had most of it, a good chunk of it memorized of what's going on. And so if you... certain translations today actually have a lot of that called out and actually switch the
There's
the
lots
text.
of good study Bibles.
Yeah.
No, I think that's really important because, again, the New Testament writers did not have the New Testament. So their only scripture was the Old Testament. Now, they place the authority of the gospel on top of that,
Yeah.
but that was kind of the underlying understanding of who God was, and Jesus draws on that.
Yeah.
For sure, right? So
And then another one, God's revelation of himself, which
that was one thing I left out. That's a really good one.
the initial thought is God's mad and angry. Well, did we read the part before that?
Well,
all the promises that he gave in,
yeah.
what is it? The
There's
most
that
quoted one.
Exodus.
Yeah. The most quoted, is it in all, or is it just in the Old Testament? Or is it the most quoted verse of the Bible by the Bible?
Ooh, I think it might be.
But basically it is who God is and what his character is about. And so I think that part is super critical for us to know of. One, I think it helps us understand, hey, what is our view of God? This was super helpful for me because I learned about 4 years ago that I did have a very skewed view of who God was. I had the wrathful, the God sitting up there with his stick and a furrowed brow, thinking about how many wrong
hair,
things
beard.
Billy had. I don't think he did have a beard.
Oh, no? Not in your version?
No, but he is an old man for sure. Do you have it handy?
Yeah, I do. So the verse that Billy was referring to is Exodus 34, verses 6 through 7. So this is where Moses is up on Mount Sinai. The Israelites had failed. They built the golden calf even after they had just committed to following God. And so Moses is needing an affirmation that God is going to stay with them. And so he asks for
Is this
that.
after he says, I am who I am, and gives him his name? Or is this in that? I think
The I am who I am was a burning bush, no?
yes.
So that was way before.
Yeah. So
'Cause
this
that's
would be
before that.
so this would be after the
That-
burning bush.
This is so after the burning bush, Moses went back to not Israel, Egypt. They went through all the plagues. Then they, the parting of the Red Sea. The Israelites leave. They're
Big
out in
grumpy.
the desert. Yeah.
complaining about food, water. And,
All sorts
All
of
the
stuff are happening. Then they end up at Mount Sinai, get the 10 Commandments.
yeah.
Moses disappears for 40 days and they're building a golden calf.
Yeah.
So
He's like, what?
So Moses is asking God to show him himself. And so God passes past Moses and says, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. So that's God's description of himself. Slow to anger.
I don't think that's most people's view of that.
Nope.
And so I think, again, what would be really interesting is to basically ingrain that verse and maybe read through the Old Testament and see where you see all those characteristics start to show up.
Those, I think, is it 5 or 6 characteristics? I don't remember, but that I just read now, show up over
Everywhere.
and over and over again. New Testament and Old Testament. You will see them everywhere. Faithfulness is a big one that you see.
You see that, and you see that slow to anger piece a lot.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because that is the one that most people are like, that's not the view that I have of him. I'm trying to see if that is the one that is the most quoted Bible. Most quoted verse by the Bible. I think it is that one. My search history is like, what are the ones that most people quote? And I'm like, well,
No, I want to know what
we
the
know
Bible
that. Needless to say, it is one of the most quoted by the Bible, and so it's interesting that is the character of God is what is quoted the most, and so something to just kind of keep an eye on. And then the last one is, all of it is pointing towards Christ. And what do I mean by that? In all of these scenarios, in many of these covenants, and all of the kings and these people who are put in leader type roles, and many different other ones, there's this silhouette that's kind of put up around them because they've been given these promises of this Messiah that's coming. And so every time this new person comes and comes into power, they're going, is this him? Is this the Messiah? And maybe they have certain pieces of it, and then they fall. And then the next one comes, they may have different sort of the pieces of that Messiah promise, but then they fall. And then another one might come, and so there's this silhouette that's put over all these people throughout the Old Testament.
There's this anticipation that that Savior is going to come,
So
and
they're
everyone's
just waiting and waiting. And as you finish the Old Testament, they're not there.
And then there's silence.
Yep, for a very long time. Or are you going to ask a question?
No, I was going to circle back. I was able to look up really quick. So it said, yes, that Exodus 34, those verses from there is the most quoted. And I read something that I think will really resonate with everyone out there listening. The Bible Project equated it to John 3:16. Like for us,
that was there.
If you were going to say quote a verse from the Bible, I think a lot of people would go with John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten son. Yep. And the Bible Project is saying that Exodus verse is like the Old Testament equivalent of that back for the Jewish people.
Man. So they must have not had the perspective that God was this big, bad, wrathful.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, right? And I guess it might partially depend on at what period of time you're talking about. Because think about it. Like, we're here in the U.S. Our country is relatively a young country, but how I think of our country is very different from someone alive in 1800, for example, right? Like they'd have a completely different perspective. So Israel as a nation has a long history. So it might depend. Like if you're in the middle of exile, I don't know what you're going to say about God.
True. Like, where is he? So those are just some pieces I think that matter, that inform your reading of the New Testament. How would you, pivoting here, how would you describe the story of the Old Testament? Hey, y'all. Thanks for tuning in to this episode on the Old Testament. This conversation actually ended up going just a bit longer than we were expecting, so we decided to break this up into 2 separate episodes. And so we encourage you be on the lookout for part 2 of the Old Testament. But we just thank you for listening to this one. We hope it was valuable. We hope it sparked some questions or some thoughts. And until then, we just actually ask that you would jump over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you might be listening from. Leave us a review, hit the like button. It helps us get broadcast out to more listeners. You can also find us at fishingformenministries.org or on Instagram or LinkedIn. But until then, we'll catch y'all on the next one. Thanks.